And finally, our last session before we can break and socialize and ask all the questions we want to be asking, we have an incredible panel with Eamonn Store. Eamonn is a recovering ad executive. He ran The Guardian North America, so news outlet, now runs FairShare and partners meaningful causes, important causes with corporations, and the whole team from Youth Speak Of, almost in person. We also have one who's going to be Zooming in to join us, so it's Eamonn Store, Christi Cooper, Olivia Ahnemann, and Vic Barrett. And then by Zoom, we're going to have Kelsey Juliana, the lead plaintiff in Juliana versus the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the last session between us and delicious food and the hospitality. And I wondered, if anyone that saw it, what would be your one-sentence kind of description to somebody who hadn't seen it? Does anyone want to offer one? No, we're tired. There you go. Jean, thanks.
I don't trust politicians.
Don't trust politicians.
Don't trust politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing is that really... Sorry, say again?
And the courts.
And the court. Don't trust the courts. They're all in it together. And they've never been stronger than ever. When you talk about the three pillars of government, President, Congress and the courts, they've never been more in cahoots. So when we think about the battle of our future, we're going to talk about it really to begin with in the context of what 21 kids did as the plaintiffs against the government. And I think it's a really interesting story because it's not your typical climate change story. It's really about the journey of those 21 kids, and it's about our rights, our human rights, and the human rights of our youth. So before I introduce the team here, we're going to quickly show you, because most of you haven't seen it, we're going to show you a really nice, this isn't the trailer, it's just a really nice 3-minute segment that really helps you understand the context of the documentary.
There we go.
Yeah, we can open up our shutters. Let's go. My bed's fine, room's fine, don't judge it. This is my shelf. This is my all-time favorite place to go. When I was scared because there was the hurricane, I came up here, and this is where I felt safe. It's because I knew if it flooded, that it couldn't wreck anything here and everything. So I knew that I could trust this area right here. Crap, this is new. It's very frightening and disturbing. You see this giant tree down in one of my best friend's yard. I've lived with the hurricanes my whole entire life. And even though it's reality, it's really scary.
All of our traditions and everything is based here. And a lot of our origin stories are from here. We can't just leave because it's just too sacred for us.
It's all been a matter of choices. And our feelings of despair and dread and anxiety is all because of choices that we had no participation in.
Everything could have changed, like really before I was born. I was born in '71.
I think 1971 will be known as the year of action for the future generations of America.
The history of this whole period has got to be the saddest story ever told. This huge failure to rise to the moment. I think it's the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic.
When I look back over that period of time, I think in some sense, I've failed to do really to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So I'm very gratified that somebody can make use of my documents.
This is why we need trial, because this story has to come out. And government can come in and make their case if they want, but a judge needs to hear from both sides. Because if it's as bad as we think it is and all the evidence we have indicates, it's the biggest crime against humanity ever, and it's a constitutional violation by any standard. Yeah.
So we've got with us this afternoon, we have both Christi and Olivia, the director and the producer of Youth vs. Gov. We're delighted we've got Vic. Those of you that were here 3 years ago, was it, Vic? You were with us?
Yep.
And this was all in progress. And we were going to have Kelsey with us, who's the lead plaintiff, Kelsey Juliana. And unfortunately, Kelsey's not well at the moment, so out of an abundance of caution, we put her in a room. But she's dialed in, and hopefully she can talk. Can you hear us, Kelsey, okay? Yes. Can you speak? Say hello.
Hello.
Oh, okay, you're working. We're just checking working. I wanted just to start. I really just wanted to start with you, if we could get it to work, and Vic, just to talk a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your background, because this audience, most of them haven't seen those elements about how you grew up, why Cascadia matters to you, all of those elements, and Vic as well. Just give us a bit of background, and then how did this come to be? What was that sort of time 4+ years ago? Kelsey, why don't you start as the lead, as the grown-up of the group?
I was going to say, I know I am the grown-up of the group at this point, but I'm by no means the lead. And let me know if, it seems like it's a little bit of a playback, so let me know if you can understand me. Can you understand me?
Yeah.
Okay, there's just a little playback on my end. Yeah, by no means the lead. I'm simply the named plaintiff, and that was just strategic for the case. I was the oldest of the group, had known a lot of the plaintiffs and kind of brought along a lot of the plaintiffs onto the case. I had already been suing my state government in Oregon since I was transitioning between 8th grade and freshman year of high school, so I'd already been in the courts for a couple years and had some sense of some of the legal jargon. Still don't quite understand a lot of it. And luckily I have some badass lawyers who are really amazing, and they can take this case forward. And yeah, so I always want to correct that, just the named plaintiff. So my background, I'm now 26, I turned 26 this year, and I first got involved in climate action when I was 10. And I like to say, although it's not a joke, that I burned out at 11. I did, I burned out at 11. I got overwhelmed, full of despair. I learned that our ecosystems across the world were collapsing, species were going extinct, but it was still this very far away crises, physically distanced from myself and my life. And so I burned out at 11, I got overwhelmed, felt helpless, a little hopeless, and then I started thinking, okay, you know what? There's no sense in caring so deeply about something and feeling like you're unable to make a change. Let's dive into this. What is global warming at the time? What is climate change? And so I did more research. I looked at how climate change was, or climate destabilization was affecting my community. I looked at how it was affecting people and culture and all the systems that make up both human and animal and biological communities. And when I was 18, I walked across the country with the Great March for Climate Action. And then that next year, I deferred college for that. And then that next year, we filed the federal case. And it was just a matter of taking both allowing for a greater awareness from my end and asking more questions, and also kind of escalating the demands for action. So again, like my school when I was in middle school, my community, my country, and then our federal government. And just a background on my name, yeah, Kelsey Cascadia Rose Juliana is my name, and I was named after a place that my parents met defending some of the remaining old-growth forests in our nation, and my name, Cascadia, of course, well, Cascadia Rose, I should say, is symbolic not only for the meaning the bioregion, Cascadia and the flower, but also Cascadia Rose as in to rise. And so kind of, I was born in the woods, and also my parents made it so that this idea of people and movement rising in defense and overcoming greedy forces, because they won the campaign, they protected old growth forests. That's sort of built into my identity as well.
And Vic, let's come across to you, because you're one of the 21, but none of you guys knew each other really right before this case.
Some of us did. Like Kelsey said, Kelsey did an awesome job of recruiting a lot of the Oregon plaintiffs because of relationships that they already had. But yeah, I didn't know anybody that was on the lawsuit before I had joined. But yeah, some of my background is I am a first-generation American. I'm Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Latino, and so I've always been very aware of like the vulnerability that comes with identity, and especially because I grew up in a 98% white part of upstate New York that was fairly conservative. So I kind of had to develop a very strong sense of justice at a young age, and also be very aware of my own vulnerability with the identities that I hold and what's important to me. And so I just knew that I know how scary it can be to feel vulnerable, and I wanted to prevent that for other people in any way possible. So when I was lucky enough to move to New York City to go to school, I decided to get involved basically in any ways that I could. I joined after school programs, met really cool kids, and then started to find really awesome mentors that taught me about this concept of climate justice, which at first I was like, climate change, justice, they didn't really line up for me, but after learning about the fact that, at least in New York, Black and brown communities tend to be on the front lines, and learning that all over the world, Black and brown communities tend to be on the front lines, it kind of became an issue that was pretty impossible to ignore. And so I worked on campaigns in New York City public schools, mostly to mandate climate education in New York City public schools K through 12, because it became very evident that if we wanted to fix the climate crisis, we were going to need a youth movement, and you can't really build a movement when young people, where they spend most of their day every day, aren't learning about the largest existential issue to them that exists. So that's kind of where I kicked off, but I was facing a lot of frustration, kind of being 15, 16, having to go to city council members' offices, being super patronized, getting photos taken and pats on the back and then kicked out and never talked to again about when we were coming to them with hard facts, evidence, everything that they needed to make the difference that we were asking them for. And even though we were their constituents, they didn't feel accountable to us because we couldn't vote for them. So when Juliana versus US came up as an opportunity, it was really exciting to me, and I was really enthusiastic to get involved because it was this opportunity to take everything I knew and take all these cold, hard facts about the climate crisis that are undeniable and put them in this medium where they couldn't be denied by the US federal government. Because it's just like something that Julia says in the film, when you're in the court of law, climate denial is perjury. And that seemed like a really powerful place for young people to be able to present facts.
And you had a very different family structure to like Kelsey. Your parents aren't climate activists.
Yeah, no, it would have been cool to be born in a cabin in the woods. But no, regular old hospital bed for me. But yeah, my mom was ever very, like, she has her own concept of justice and things that she cares about, especially being a part of an endangered indigenous community, but wasn't necessarily a climate expert and not a climate activist, and I don't think it's something that she really thought about much other than in the ways that it kind of on the day-to-day impacted the grief in a community in Honduras. And my dad, on the other hand, We both have the lived experience of having grown up in very conservative, predominantly white communities. And I think that we just had very opposite ways of dealing with it. And he tends to be more conservative and actually has a really hard time with the concept of climate change and the climate crisis and believing in it.
But there's a glimmer of hope at the end of the dock, at least. That
there is.
maybe
You'll have to tune in.
Little more open-minded. Christi, I think I first met you 3 years ago here when this was a work in progress. It was a thing you were talking about that we were trying to envisage. Like, as the director, you're the chief storyteller, right? When did you come across this situation that you knew this story needed to be told?
Yeah, I met some of these young people back in 2011. That's when I met Kelsey. Yeah. When she had sued the state of Oregon, I came on board with Witness. It was a partnership with Witness and Our Children's Trust to create a series of 10 short films focused on these young people that were suing their state governments. So at the time, I created a short film about Kelsey, about Chernaik, some of the other young people that are now in the federal case. And that was kind of my entry into climate litigation and working with young people, and continued on with these relationships with them. And after they filed the lawsuit in 2015, I was very closely following it. And when they had their first win in the spring of 2016 with Judge Coffin, that was the moment that I realized this case is going somewhere and it has legs. The first case that they filed back in 2011 was based solely on the public trust doctrine, and that was very quickly dismissed. And what makes this case so unique is that it's a constitutional claim. These young people are claiming that the United States government has violated their rights to life, liberty, property, and personal security through their willful actions in creating the climate change crisis. And so for me, that was a unique entry into this story. And when they had their first win, that was kind of when I approached Julia and asked if I could follow this, and started building relationships with the other plaintiffs like Vic and the other family members.
Yeah. And then Olivia, you come on as the producer, right? So your job is to bring this to life, right? Is to make sure it comes together and it gets the journey it deserves. This is not a new world to you. You've done a bunch of like climate-related documentaries. What brought you into this? What was different about this story that?
I think when Christi and I were first introduced by some mutual friends and colleagues, and I'd come off producing a film called The Human Element, which also looked at climate change and its impacts on communities in the US. There was something about this story and this case, the story of Youth v. Gov, to me, really felt like it was a story about a solution from the outset. So instead of being about, this is climate change, this is the science of climate change, trying to convince an audience that climate change and the climate crisis is here and now and real, I felt like this story, in the way that Christi wanted to tell it, and the case itself, it's built in as a solution. It's young people taking their case against the US government to hold them accountable for the climate crisis. And I loved the piece also, or two pieces of the story that Christi envisioned telling was the young people, Kelsey and Vic and Chernaik and all of the plaintiffs in the film. It's just such a wonderful group of young people. And then I also loved the sort of investigative evidence part and the whodunit, like what our government knew and when they knew it, and unpacking all of that in the frame of this constitutional lawsuit.
Yeah. And obviously, this, when you're making a documentary, you've got a certain amount of life before you've got to put it out there to the world. This case has been running, 6+ years, nearly 7? 7
in August.
Yeah, and it's still going to run. So obviously the story ends. It doesn't end on, it sort of ends on a positive and a disappointing note. The disappointment is it gets rejected by the third attempt of the
Ninth Circuit Court.
And then the sort of positive news, which we'll come on to, is it's sort of bigger than the case, like the movement it's creating. Who wants to? Because I don't know who's best. Kelsey, I'm not going to ask you too many questions because I know it's a struggle for you to speak. But who wants to give the update on like where are we now? Because the story finishes in 2020.
Yeah. So where we are right now is basically we have filed a motion to amend with Judge Ahnemann, who was the original district court who gave us the court judge that gave us that really beautiful decision that the right to a stable and livable climate is fundamental to
human society.
Which was a really precedent-setting decision to have come from a federal court judge. But we filed a motion to amend, basically to amend our argument. Should I give the details of why we want to amend the argument? Yeah, basically wanting to amend the argument to make it more palatable for the federal court system so that they don't have to put redressability in. So basically at first we were asking for the courts to ask for a climate action plan to be implemented that would bring CO2 levels down to a safe and livable environment. And now instead of that, we're asking for the the court system to just declare that we have a constitutional right to a livable planet. And there's actually a lot of history to the court just making decisions like that. Just like Brown versus Board of Education, the court didn't necessarily have to do anything. They just had to declare the fact that separate was not necessarily equal. And so that's kind of where we're at right now, just trying to get that, get back into the court system and get to trial so that we can have them declare that as a constitutional right.
They had a hearing last June, and we're still waiting, a year later, still waiting for a decision from Judge Ahnemann, but very hopeful that she'll put the case back on track to go to trial.
And on a bigger theme, like the case is the case, and it's kind of, that was the reason for the story, but it actually grows, the story grows with the case, right? And then you start to see the movement of youth, right? And we're talking really about the battle for our future. So I think one of the really encouraging things about this is that how many millions of kids the story inspires to follow the same path. You talk about it, but do you know how many other cases are now being filed by people like you in different countries, in different states, in different places? Because this is now a movement of litigation. It's not just kids marching.
So since the Juliana case was filed, there are now over 26 other cases around the world led by young people that are using their constitutions to hold their governments accountable. Some of these cases have been extremely successful. For instance, in Colombia, there's a case in Canada that is going to the courts this coming year called LaRose versus Her Majesty the Queen. There's also 7 pending state cases right now in the U.S. Because there's young people that are suing their state governments using their constitution. And Montana is a very interesting case, Held versus Montana. It's going to be the very first climate change lawsuit, constitutional climate change lawsuit, that is going to trial next February.
Yeah. So there's a whole social movement of I think about these changes in 4 quadrants. You've got societal movements, policy making, financial institutions, and innovation. And these things all fire off each other. And this afternoon we've heard from all different areas about how the financial markets are reassessing the value of fossil fuels. But what we're really talking about here is these 2 things firing off each other, which is creating a movement, but it's also impacting policy, right? As policymakers are realizing that this isn't going to go away. These actually kind of annoying kids that came in for the photo op, right, are now voting. Yeah. And now there's more annoying kids coming behind them that are going to kind of put that pressure on. I feel like I'm talking too much now. I should be asking the questions. So policy aside and lawmaking, like where do you see interest in like the commercial sector? Do businesses get it? Do you feel that they're listening to your voice? Let's ask that to Kelsey, actually. I don't know where the camera is in here, but I assume if I look this way, I'm looking at you. Do you feel like commercial business gets what you guys are asking for in terms of greenwashing and more authentic marketing?
You know, I'm not sure if I'm the best one to answer that. I work with kids out in the woods, and that's how I see my best place in this whole movement, is inspiring. That's always been my motivation. That's always been my vision in partaking in this movement, is, you know, ensuring kids who are 10, I work with 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, age that I was when I first got into this movement. I work with kids that age who I want to ensure do not grow up feeling despaired, hopeless, and disempowered, like I did that first couple of years, learning about how reality was way back when it was so much less severe and less critical than we are right now. So, you know, I would say that if the commercial sector is involved, it's not involved enough. And yeah, that's not my main focus. I do see a lot of greenwashing, a lot of like clean, green, in whatever category, health and wellness, you know, even food. And I think a lot of that I've noticed is targeted at the youth. And so if we're targeting the young people of today with these claims of green and sustainable, and yet we're still asking them to consume new products, how is that really sustainable messaging? In a way, I find it just distracting.
Yeah. Could I follow up on that?
I'm gonna go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like what Kelsey said is just a really strong example of you have to meet young people where they're at. We're a very diverse generation, and what Kelsey as a consumer might want while teaching 10-year-olds in the woods is not necessarily going to be what a young person in New York City who's working on policy wants. But the shared vein is the genuine interest in the issue, the genuine care about what happens. I think that it's about looking at the shared values instead of trying to target young people as some like collective group that all wants the same thing, because that's just not true.
We had a conversation earlier about some of us are old enough to remember people like Jack Welch in the 80s, and that whole mentality of like the smartest prevail, the less hardworking or less smart, you get them out, and it's like up or out kind of mentality. And businesses have moved forward now to like thinking about smart everything, Internet of Things, smart technology, and now they're moving into the space of purpose. And it's about being more purposeful, and purposeful leads into maybe thoughtfulness. But when I speak to you guys, purpose is like a generic thing that's done. It's like Internet of Things in technology. You guys are talking about flourishing. Human flourishing is just this amazing sort of progression of what we actually mean beyond purpose, and regenerative systems and business models. And I feel, is business even keeping up with us, with you? Like, or is the future actually, is almost the tail wagging the dog?
Yeah, I would say I mean, it might not even just be that they're not keeping up. It could also just be like a lack of attention being paid. But I think, you know, not to our generation's horn necessarily, but I do feel that we are genuinely some of the most inherently empathetic and compassionate people, because of, you know, not a lot of other generations have grown up in a world where the UN is like, you have 13 years to protect your future. And I think that existential fact is what contributes a lot to just our values. And so, like I said, I think there's an inherent empathy and an inherent level of care that maybe a lot of other people have been spending too much time trying to figure out in terms of how we can change the world. And so now we're trying to break out of that box of like, it's not rocket science to care about each other. I feel like our generation is pretty aware of that. It's what do we do with that care, and how do we make it bigger, and in creative ways as well. So I think that kind of fits into what you're saying about flourishing and thriving. We're no longer in the purpose. We know what our purpose is. It's what do we do now?
I think we're probably nearly out of time. I can't see time. We are out of time. I thought we might be. Let's just a couple of thoughts to end on. Christi, I do want to touch on this one point. Civic duty, like civic education, like again beyond this documentary. What can it do now? How can we use it?
Yeah, I mean, we're really hoping that this film is about so much more than climate change. This is really about our democracy, about how our government functions, and we really believe that the power of what we can do with this storytelling is to encourage young people to learn more about how their government works and to engage more in civics and civic actions. And so that's some of the goals that we have with this film, is to get this film into to K through 12 across the country for free, so that we can provide grants to our educational distributor so that can be available for free with lesson plans. But we really feel like the young people today, with all the passion and the empathy and the force that they're coming with, to also give them those tools to know how to shift democracy and how to protect democracy moving forward.
2 asks from the audience to finish on.
What
would you ask? What collectively? What would be
One
to ask?
very big ask that we have is if there's anybody in the audience that has connections within the Biden administration that could help us get this film before them, so that they can understand more about the case that they are defendants in, and to really feel the heart of this story, that would be amazing. And
I would say the other ask that we have would be to help foster another generation of Kelsey and Vix and leaders in our future, to help us financially get this film available to K through 12 and lesson plans and outreach to schools across the country, to bring this into their teaching, not just traditional schools, but also after school programs and things. We feel like this story is just so well suited to inspire and teach, and with the examples of the plaintiffs and what they're doing, we hope it would sort of ricochet out into other kids.
Thank you. Kelsey, thank you for dialing in. Sorry you're not able to join us in person. Thank you to you and Vic and the 21 plaintiffs for the journey. Thank you to Christi and Olivia for telling this story that so badly needs to be told.
Thank you, Amy.
And thank you, everyone,
Thank you,
for giving us the
Amy.
last session. Thank you, Amy.